break, and so we can transition to the second panel.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. That's an easy way for Darrell to say.
Excuse us our brief conversation. We'd like to welcome our second panel of witnesses, Mr. John Hudden, Director of the Acquisition and Sourcing Management of the United States Government Accountability Office, Mr. Roger Jordan, Vice President for Government Relations Professional Services Council, Ms. Donna Jenkins, the Director of the Federal Acquisition Institute, the General Services Administration, and Ms. Katrina McFarland is the Director of the Defense Acquisition University. All of you have very busy days. I appreciate very much for you being here, the time that you put in on both your written statements and being here for oral statements and allowing us to be able to ask questions. And I hope you understand this will be a dialogue. I want to get a chance to get as much information as we can. Pursuant to all committee rules, witnesses are sworn in before they testify. Will you please rise and raise your right hands? Thank you. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give this committee is to be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. You may be seated. We're to allow time for discussion. Same rules would apply. We'd ask you to limit your testimony to 5 or so minutes. I'll be a little bit gracious with the timing on that so we can hear your entire statement. Your entire written statement, of course, will be made part of the record on that. I'd like to recognize Mr. Hudden for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Lankford, Ranking Member Conley, and members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to be here today to discuss our recent work on acquisition workforce issues at the Department of Defense, the government's largest buying entity. The Federal Government's current budget and long-term fiscal pressures underscore the importance of a highly capable workforce. Our work has found that a lack of an adequate number of trained acquisition and contract oversight personnel has placed DoD at times at risk of potentially paying more than necessary. My remarks will focus on 2 topics based on our recent work. First, I will discuss DoD's progress in rebuilding the capacity of its acquisition workforce. Second, I will offer specific insights into the Defense Contract Management Agency's efforts to rebuild its workforce as an illustration of the overall challenges the Department faces. Our work shows that DoD has made some progress in rebuilding the capacity of its civilian acquisition workforce. DoD has established a goal of increasing this workforce by 20,000 by fiscal year 2015, and DoD plans to reach this goal in 2 key ways: hiring personnel using the Defense Acquisition Workforce Development Fund and insourcing functions that were being performed by contractor personnel. Using these 2 methods, DoD reports that it hired about 5,900 individuals in fiscal year 2010. However, the Department's plans for continued acquisition workforce growth are uncertain. DoD announced it has halted the insourcing initiative except on a case-by-case basis and announced a hiring freeze for the civilian workforce due to anticipated budget constraints. DoD has indicated that initiatives using the Defense Acquisition Workforce Development Fund, including hiring for the acquisition workforce, will continue. But just as important as increasing the size of the workforce is building the workforce skills and expertise. We found that DoD has continued to make progress in completing the competency assessments, which identify the skills and capabilities of the workforce and help identify areas needing further attention. DoD reports it has used these competency assessments in part to help revise the training curriculum for its contracting career field. Now, while these actions are focused on what is considered the traditional acquisition workforce, we have also reported that DoD needs to identify the other personnel outside this traditional workforce who have a role in acquisition, such as those who help set the requirements or serve as a contracting officer's representative to manage and oversee contractor performance. These are functions that are key to sound acquisition outcomes. DoD notes that identifying this population is challenging, in part because it's spread across many organizations. Also, the acquisition duties these people perform are often done as a secondary duty. Nonetheless, DoD agreed with several of our recommendations to help it get a better handle on who these people are and the skills they need to perform their roles in the acquisition process. I will now briefly touch on our work related to DCMA. By the early 2000s, DCMA had experienced significant erosion of expertise such that it could not fulfill all of its oversight functions. Since 2008, however, DCMA has been rebuilding its workforce, making increasing use of the Defense Acquisition Workforce Development Fund to do so. For example, in fiscal year 2011, DCMA hired a little over 1,200 new employees under this authority. DCMA has also taken steps to rebuild their skill sets. For example, by the late 1990s, DCMA had lost the majority of its contract cost price analysts. And as a result, DCMA reported that DoD's acquisitions were subject to unacceptable levels of cost risks. Over the past 2 years, DCMA has hired almost 280 new contract cost price analysts and cost monitors. Now, one challenge facing DCMA is its large percentage of retirement-eligible employees, making the agency vulnerable to the loss of valuable technical expertise and organizational knowledge. In part, DCMA plans to mitigate this risk through aggressive recruiting and bringing back retired annuitants to help raise the skill levels of the newer employees. In closing, DoD has made some progress in terms of growing the acquisition workforce and identifying the skills and competency it needs. However, more needs to be done. The fiscal and budget challenges facing this nation and DoD underscore the need for DoD to strategically manage its workforce so that it has the right skills, capabilities, and training to effectively manage the billions of dollars it spends on goods and services each year. Whether DoD achieves its planned growth and unrelated workforce improvement initiatives remains uncertain. But what is certain is that DoD can ill afford not to succeed in preparing its workforce to meet its future needs. I would be happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hudden. Mr. Jordan.
Chairman Lankford, Ranking Member Conley, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity today to provide an industry perspective on the acquisition workforce. I'll begin by highlighting why the federal contracting community believes in the need for a highly skilled, well-trained, and adequately staffed acquisition workforce. Savvy businesses understand that the best customer is a well-informed, educated customer. As a business, when you have a client that accurately defines its needs, communicates openly and clearly, and recognizes the fundamental elements of the risks being adopted by your company through the partnership, then you have a customer you can work with best to deliver real capabilities and enhancements to meet their mission needs. But these important understandings are not always inherent. As the critical cog between government and the private sector, it's important that the acquisition workforce contain the expertise, training, continuing education, and commitment to collaboration that fosters successful interfaces with the private sector. The acquisition workforce suffered as a result of numerous factors dating back to the mid-90s, and appropriately, this workforce has garnered much-needed attention in recent years. As a result, there are signs of improvement, yet considerable threats to the acquisition workforce remain, and this industry has a number of observations and recommendations. First, the biggest challenge facing the acquisition workforce is how the government will address pending budget reductions. As workforce reductions related to the budget scenario continue to be debated, PSC recommends that Federal departments engage in thorough human capital planning based on evaluated mission needs. Inclusion of the acquisition workforce should be a critical component of such planning, and as a result, PSC believes agencies will discover that the acquisition workforce should not be slashed. This certainly has been the finding of DoD, and as a result, their efforts have exempted cuts to the acquisition workforce. Also, as budget pressures persist, Federal contracting will share in the burden. Savings may be achieved as government makes difficult decisions about what it is buying, but of greater significance will be decisions about how the government buys. For example, the administration has pushed for greater use of firm fixed-price contracts. In conveying such guidance, the administration also acknowledged that the use of such contracts is only encouraged where suitable to the nature of the acquisition. However, the latter message has not effectively filtered down to the field, resulting in the use of firm fixed-price contracts where inappropriate, and thus creating inordinate risk to contractors and high cost to government. In addition, industry has witnessed a dramatic increase in the use of lowest-priced technically acceptable awards. While LPTA is an important component of the acquisition toolbox, its misapplication can lead to reduced quality and mission capabilities for the government, where a focus on value may have produced greater benefits and long-term cost savings. To avoid misapplication of these approaches, PSC recommends training of the acquisition workforce, foster critical thinking and strategic decision-making rather than simply teaching strict adherence to procedures and avoiding any government risk. In addition, for more complex procurements, those involving cybersecurity, for example, the workforce must be encouraged to avoid over-reliance on the cheapest proposal and instead be encouraged and supported when they apply appropriate cost and technical trade-offs, that is, best value considerations. Communication and collaboration between the acquisition workforce and the private sector also diminished in recent years, and in order to foster meaningful partnerships, such communication must not be permitted to deteriorate further. OFPP's initiative of the initiation of the Mythbusters campaign, part of OMB's broader 25-point IT management improvement plan, seeks to encourage and clarify how industry and government can appropriately engage with one another during the acquisition process. This is a positive development, yet it is not readily apparent the message has been adopted by rank-and-file acquisition personnel. Hence, PSC recommends that OFPP take additional steps to build upon the Mythbusters campaign. Additionally, PSC encourages the examination of individual department efforts to increase the capabilities of their acquisition workforce. Gains have been made on this front as departments have established successful internship and training programs. DHS and VA are two examples. PSC believes that Congress can take steps to enhance such initiatives. The Federal Acquisition Improvement Act, for example, would build upon these initiatives by clarifying the role of FAI in government-wide acquisition workforce training and would increase FAI responsibilities to include collaboration among existing civilian agency acquisition workforce training initiatives. Lastly, I cannot stress strongly enough the importance of consistent funding for the various acquisition workforce training initiatives. Comprehensive acquisition skills are not developed overnight, and the efforts that have been initiated in recent years are not likely to yield immediate results. Hence, it is important that funding, staffing levels, and education and training for the acquisition workforce remain a priority. As a result, we strongly believe that long-term savings associated with the investment in the acquisition workforce excuse me. As a result, we strongly believe that long-term savings associated with the investment in the acquisition workforce will pay future dividends that far outweigh any short-term savings being touted as a result of acquisition workforce cuts, and the government will truly establish itself as the private sector's best customer. This concludes my testimony. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Ms. Jenkins.
Good afternoon, Chairman Langford, Ranking Member Connolly, members of the committee. As you are aware, I am Donna Jenkins, the Director of the Federal Acquisition Institute, and I am pleased to be here today to tell you about the progress FAA has made over the last 8 months since I have assumed the position. Taxpayers rely on the workforce to make critical business decisions. They impact the lives of every American, from protecting the homeland to supporting the small businesses that fuel our economy. This demands an agile workforce with diverse and sophisticated sets of skills to define requirements, make complicated trade-off decisions among competing alternatives, and manage complex projects with tight budget and schedule constraints. Agencies have shifted from buying products requiring a process-based procurement approach to ensure the right products delivered on time to now an acquisition of complex services and technologies, the success of which depends on a knowledge-based lifecycle management approach. Our professionals must navigate an evolving commercial marketplace driven by rapid advances in technology, global supply chains, and emerging security concerns. Keeping the workforce's skills is imperative to our success. Improvements have been realized, but we still face 3 fundamental challenges. The first, as mentioned by everybody else, is the demographics of the acquisition workforce. We do have a younger, more educated workforce, but they still require the necessary technical training to be successful. We also need to ensure that the seasoned half of the workforce, expected to retire over the next 10 years, transfers their knowledge to the new and less experienced members. The second challenge is to make smart investments that result in shared workforce management tools and use technology to eliminate inefficient duplication across the government. The third challenge is to continue to improve collaboration across the acquisition community. We can no longer afford for each agency to solve its own human capital challenges. We need to collectively develop tools, training, and share leading practices to improve standardization, reduce redundancy and costs, and cultivate a mobile workforce. FAI has been working with key stakeholders and collaborating on these challenges. We are partnering with OFPP and the Office of Personnel Management to establish the first ever acquisition track in the Presidential Management Fellows Program for fiscal year 12. We're reaching a broader base of acquisition professionals and have added new training on critical topics such as price analysis and human trafficking. For the first time, FAI is training program managers and contracting officers' representatives, positions critical to responsibly defining the government's requirement and managing the contracts after award. We are investing in technology that pays off. This month, FAI trained 5,600 acquisition workforce members in a single session through an online webinar. Class enrollment for FAI-sponsored courses increased by 30% in fiscal year 11. FAI is using a risk-based approach to improve the certification programs. Now, the highest level of certification for the contracting officer's representative combines additional training and experience requirements to optimize the taxpayer's return on investment. In partnership with the Department of Homeland Security, FAI has launched the Federal Acquisition Institute Training Application System, or FATAS. It's a robust workforce management tool. FATAS will eliminate the need for standalone, stovepipe systems across governments by providing agencies with a way to manage their workforce, certifications, warrants, and training delivery programs. Soon, agencies will be able to use the system's business intelligence tools to analyze the demographics of the workforce, supporting more effective human capital planning. FAI has also worked to re-energize its many interagencies committee, which helps shape the initiatives, program, and training so that the government only has to invest in these items only once. In conclusion, with the support and leadership of GSA and OFPP, FAI has delivered innovative solutions which demonstrate the value of cross-agency collaboration. I appreciate the committee's attention to this critical issue and Ranking Member Connolly's proposed legislation that would support smart investments in the acquisition workforce. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Ms. McFarland.
Chairman Lankford, Ranking Member Connolly, distinguished members of the committee. My name is Katrina McFarland, and I'm the president of the Defense Acquisition University. I'm really thankful for this opportunity to testify, and I also appreciate your support to this very critical area, and also to the panel members because they're right on target. So my testimony will be brief and focused strictly on what the Defense Acquisition University has seen and has developed on. The best way to ensure our warfighters get what they need and that our taxpayers get their money's worth and that we combat fraud, waste, and abuse is a well-trained and fully qualified acquisition workforce. The defense acquisition workforce is comprised of individuals from a broad spectrum of technical expertise, program and business skills, and institutional memory. The workforce is approximately 150,000 strong, the Standing Army of the Potomac, and it spans 15 career fields: program management, systems engineering, logistics, contracting. With the drawdown in the 1990s, as referenced, we left our acquisition workforce and organizations in a significant reduction in capacity and capability, especially in critical areas like contracting, auditing, pricing, engineering. Still with us, this bathtub effect that has been discussed means that many people are leaving us with that critical expertise and leaving behind less experience. In the 1991 Defense Acquisition Workforce Improvement Act, DOIA, DOD established a statutorily mandated career development program for people who are formally identified in the acquisition workforce. This certification program consists of three pieces: education, experience, and training. DAU provides the training piece of this program, which has grown through our 40 years of experience serving the acquisition community. DoD began its rebuild of its defense acquisition workforce in approximately April of 2009. With the help of the Defense Acquisition Workforce Development Fund, DOTF, established by Congress in the FY 2008 NDAA, we increased our workforce capacity and began redressing our workforce capacity concerns. But while workforce size is important and skill mix is important, quality is paramount. Today we offer about 100 courses, both classroom and online. Entry-level training is predominantly provided online, as is continuous learning. We have a lot of online training that's self-paced. It provides knowledge management, communities of practice, and is open to the public. Our IT infrastructure is critical in our ability to reach that workforce 24/7 around the world. As a result of the funds from DOTF, in addition to being able to expand our web-based learning, DAU has been able to hire additional faculty and additional infrastructure for training in classrooms for what is our advanced defense acquisition training. Our faculty provide, in addition to training in classroom, consulting targeted training, rapid deployment training, and all of this to the acquisition organizations throughout the department and at call. A combined total of our web and faculty services is tallied this year at 11 million learning hours. We stay responsive to current DoD concerns. In addition to having recognized that services are a larger part of what our spend is, we've recognized the need to provide our workforce services acquisition training. We've developed a services acquisition mall online. We've developed automated services requirements development tools so that you stress on what's important, on what you want before you issue forth the solicitation, and deliver services acquisition workshops across the department. We've worked this past year with the DoD Inspector General's Office and the Defense and Services Audit Agencies to identify acquisition training requirements for the auditor community and have signed an agreement to that for. We've also signed a memorandum with the Defense Contract Management Agency, Charlie Williams, to establish a new DAU college, the College of Contract Management, for on-site management of major weapon systems contract and in-theater contract operations. We're increasing our training for these DoD employees that are not included in the statutorily mandated defense acquisition workforce, but whose role is critical for their successful acquisition outcomes to be had. For example, in response to the 2007 NDAA, we now train those DoD employees responsible for generating requirements for major defense acquisition programs. We've also increased training for deployed contracting officers and contracting officer representatives. We are not alone in our training role. As you see beside us, we cooperate in training initiative with the Federal Acquisition Institute, VA Academy, NASA, Department of Homeland Security, many others. We're currently working to achieve efficiencies in that area by sharing our curriculum, our IT infrastructure, governance, facilities in some cases, and a great number of cross-agency recognition of workforce credentials so our workforce can be transitory. Our contracting courses are a great example of this, specifically tailored for the civilian use, a process that we're expanding. Because DAU is a provider of practitioner training, what we teach, particularly in classrooms, is focused on what our people need to do on their jobs. With that, and the fact that we've trained and grown over the 40 years in our own learning, we've expanded and taken a look at how we can improve what we do and how we teach. We're engineering right now our next steps to develop a qualified acquisition professional. The Department's most recent effort towards a fully qualified acquisition workforce is this qualification initiative. Our goal is to have the workforce that is both certified, which is formal classroom and the sundry associated testing that comes with, but also to take it into the workplace environment and qualify those folks on the job to effectively perform their duties as acquisition professionals. We will ensure that the workforce both understands the job when they leave the classroom and also can effectively perform it successfully. This qualification initiative, I might add, responds to a statutory mandate, Section 1723C of the Title 10 U.S.C. Acquisition is inherently a responsibility of the government, and successful acquisition outcomes are critical to our national security. We must increase our buying power and deliver efficiently and affordably and responsible stewards to do the taxpayers' resources the justice it deserves. We must always ensure that our warfighters have products and services they need to win. To do this, we need a fully qualified acquisition workforce. The Honorable Kendall said, "Our legacy is to leave behind a stronger workforce, a more capable workforce than we inherited." I promise you we will do that. And I thank you for this opportunity again and welcome your questions.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you as well. We'll probably do several rounds of questions just back and forth as we get a chance, so this will be an ongoing conversation to be able to pull out what we can on it. Give an overall concern for me, and this is not something that you can solve on it. In the 1990s, with our wonderful peace dividend, we dialed back a lot of things, including this contracting workforce, and so we dialed that back, and just get it dialed back and reduce our numbers in time for September 11th. When we dramatically increase the number of contracts that are out there. And so we spend 10 years trying to catch up on personnel and training about the time that we now start to slow down our purchasing again. How do we hit a balance on this so that we do not overreact in the same way, that we suddenly dramatically increase our numbers and our training and all the investment into it, overdo that, if that's imaginable right now, and get out of balance again? So any quick ideas on that, on how we manage that in the days to come? Because I'd hate to see us 10 years from now go through a cut and go through the same cycle again. Yes, sir, Mr. Hutton.
Mr. Chairman, the way I would frame that question is to make an intelligent decision, one needs to know at each agency what you're buying, what your current capability is in terms of an acquisition workforce, and what are your needs to assure yourself you're going to get good outcomes for what you need to buy. The extent to which you have gaps, I think you need to identify those.
Who's the best person to track that? Is that the agency head in each area, or who can best determine that?
I think it starts at the agency. I think the procurement officials, I think other stakeholders such as human capital people, people from the CFO shop, I think it takes a team like that to put it at a high enough level in an organization to have a good understanding of what the condition is right now. Also, you need to look at the demographics. If you have a lot of senior people in your organization, and as it's been discussed here before, bringing in a lot of new people, they can get the initial training, but they need that experience. They need that mentoring.
That is something that comes up consistently in a lot of the conversations that I have with contractors. It is we understand the process better than the person that's actually working through our contract, and it's because they're occasionally getting someone new. And as they work through that system, it's frustrating for them because they're saying, no, this is how it's done. It's frustrating because they know there's flexibility in contracting vehicles, and they get frustrated. Mr. Jordan, I think you mentioned the fixed price vehicle as being the preferential. So all of that challenge is getting a chance to work through both training and age and experience and all those things that you all live and breathe every single day to be able to work through. It's getting that down to every single person in the organization. Tell me how you feel like progress is being made in that. I'm hearing some optimism in that. And obviously, you're very aware of this. I'm not the first to bring it up by far. So, Mr. Jordan, you want to mention that real quick? You've already brought it up.
Chairman, I think that I'll start with the myth-busting campaign. There was a significant deterioration in the communication between industry and government dating back several years, and the myth-busting campaign has really started to turn that around. I still think it needs to be an additional focus. Like I said, the direction from leadership has been right, but how that message is permeated down through the field it's been a little slower. And I think that Mr. Gordon has recognized that and recognized that needs to be an additional area of focus. So I would start with that, and I think that with the drive towards more firm fixed price contracts, again, it's not necessarily the guidance from leadership has been wrong. They've said, we want you to focus more on firm fixed price, but use it where it's appropriate.
Well, yeah, what I've heard back from contractors is, I'm glad to do a firm fixed price, but it's going to cost more because I don't know what the risk is involved, where another vehicle may be. And I understand this is a reaction the other direction, but I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. I'm glad to do it, but I'm going to always charge more for this because I'm assuming all the risk.
That's true. So it comes back to the guidance from leadership about using it where it's appropriate. And that guidance has been right. But again, it's the full message is not filtering all the way down to the people that it needs to filter down to.
Mr. Jenkins, Ms. McFarland, either one, how do we work through it? Because obviously that's got to be someone with clairvoyance to be able to determine which one's going to be cheaper and which one's going to be better for the taxpayer at the end of it. So I understand there's not going to be a perfect way to be able to determine that. What's your suggestion on how to process through that?
Well, I'm going to start, if I could, back on your original premise, which is how do we get there? How do we get, in the midst of this economic decline, attention to the detail that you've brought to the attention of the workforce's competency? And I think one of the things the Department of Defense has done under the guidance of Dr. Carter and Mr. Kendall has, with the recognition that it was the outfall of a lot of the better buying power initiatives, was this sudden recognition that the workforce wasn't up to the par to be able to perform the duties that this policy, which was accurately written, was intended to outcome-wise. So one of the things they did was with the university to step up that. And another thing is the services themselves are taking a very, very conscious and disciplined approach to take a look at their workforce and where their needs are. What can you do to improve it? For fixed price, for example, you need to explain to people where they get the resources to help them understand which is related to why you would go into a fixed price arena, cost and price certainty. You have to have a good understanding of the configuration of the item before you try to engage in a fixed price situation. And unfortunately, people, just as Mr. Jordan said, engaged in the act of compliance vice the act of understanding. That critical thinking is one of our challenges.
Okay. I'm going to defer to Mr. Connolly for serious questions, and we'll come back and we'll finish this up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before you start the clock, just for a second, this whole conversation reminds me of the story John Glenn used to tell. I used to work with John Glenn in the Senate, that when he was sent into space, he was in a capsule on top of a rocket with hundreds of thousands of thrust, comforted in the knowledge that both had been won by the lowest Federal bidder. Contracting was even on his mind way back then. I want to thank our panel for being here, and let me just ask this first question, if I may. Ms. McFarland, I'm listening to your statistics, which are very impressive. 100 courses, 11 million learning hours. How many people trained this last year?
This year, 57,000 seats went through.
57,000. Wow. And I want to thank Mr. Jordan and Ms. Jenkins for their kind remarks with respect to the FAI Improvement Act. Do you have any view on how that might make your job easier, harder, or you don't care?
Personally, I think it's an excellent opportunity for improvement. Working with Donna, and particularly, I'm sorely disappointed Dan's going, because he's been a bright light, and the support that you all have been providing for this area has certainly moved us forward, and it needs to continue to move forward.
Thank you.
And HR 1424 has the right emphasis, and it excludes the DoD appropriately, so it looks, for my personal view, excellent support.
Thank you very much. Ms. Jenkins, you gave a wonderful example of an online training program with 5,600 people in one session. Very impressive. How many were totally trained this year? Would you venture to guess?
Yeah. So we did 7,000 actual seat classes, and then the civilian workforce has continued to benefit from the FAI-DAU partnership, completing 87,000 online course modules at Defense.
And is it your impression that if you, I'm not trying to set it up, but if you had augmented resources, that you might be able to meet a much larger population? I mean, DAU's doing 57,000 a year.
So, well, we do appreciate.
Is there demand that's unmet, is what I'm getting at?
We do appreciate the support that you provide the workforce. And I think we all want the same thing, a competent and efficient acquisition workforce to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. FAI has a slightly different role in that we don't do organic teaching. We don't teach the classes ourselves. We hire our vendor support. So in collaboration with a number of the other Federal agencies, we assist them by setting the standards that they must all meet, which is a little bit different role than, for instance, the VA Academy or the large training program that exists at DHS and NASA, just to name a few of the other agencies. So I think as long as we're all training to the same set of standards, that we work collaboratively together, we can meet our need.
Would it be fair to say that, for example, an online class like the one you cited, and I've taken those myself when I was in the private sector, a lot of that's either entry-level or continuing learning kinds of classes, but sometimes there's no substitute for in-the-classroom technical training to make sure I'm mastering what I need to master. Would that be a fair observation from your point of view?
I think in general, yes, you're absolutely correct.
And would it also be true that virtually every Federal agency, despite the wonderful work of DAU and FAI, still needs to have its own specialized training because the VA mission is different from FDA?
Yes, I would agree with that, and I see the role of FAI there as being collaborative, because there is still even a baseline portion of the training program that would be consistent across all the Federal agencies. So I'm very excited to actually say that the Chief Acquisition Officers Council just approved us to do what we call a training collaboration board, or to establish a training collaboration board. And what that would do would be allow us to discuss any developmental items that we're going to, any courses we're going to develop, and we would be able to, say, come up with an 80% solution once, and then leave the room for agencies to add their specific mission requirements in the remaining portion. I think that's a good role for FAI.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan, you heard Mr. Gordon actually observe that in his conversations with many contractors, he's heard frequently how tired they are of having to train Federal contract officers on the contracts they're managing. Is that something you also hear at the Professional Services Council in terms of the members you represent? And any other observation you may have about that?
Absolutely. We hear a lot of the same, and it comes back to my opening comments about the need or the desire for a well-educated customer is really our best customer. We do find that we're having to do a lot of explaining, a lot of educating ourselves on some acquisition-related issues. It would certainly be beneficial to both sides if that training or understanding is brought to the table in advance, so that we can get to the process of contracting versus educating.
My time is up, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let me ask a question. How do we move into a couple of things? One is best value for something, and the best value is this wonderful nebulous concept that everyone has to have open for a conversation. But as we deal with the best value, how do we move from best value is cheapest this year versus cheapest in 10 years, or maybe most efficient in 10 years, or has a greater life expectancy, because things have different energy usages. Some may be more efficient in their energy usage. It may be made of better equipment, and so it's going to last longer. Those are pure judgment calls. How is the criteria set, and for the evaluation for that contracting officer to say, this was actually, is there, well, I guess what I'm asking is there a second guesser in this to go back and teach them and say, you made this decision, this one was cheaper than this one, but by the way, as I go back and look at everything, I think this would have been a better deal because of this. Do they give that? Is there someone that's stepping over their shoulder and helping train them in that? Is there some way to be able to evaluate that? So take off. I think you understand where I am.
Yes, I do, sir. One of the things the Department had to build into its acquisition process, DoD 5000, is milestones and decision points to facilitate life cycle cost, which is what you're talking about, best value. And we have not the contracting officer inclined to make that determination. It's a team, because the engineer needs to understand what the traits are, the logistician, the pricer, the coster. So when there's a source selection to be made, that is, when you're deciding upon what you're going to buy, those people come together in consensus. And then the Department has to take a look at it from the administration's view. So when they come forward to make a decision, it's not just the local decision, it's the organization's and Department decision.
So do you feel like we're on top of this at this point, or do you feel like it's improving, or where do you think we are in this process?
It will and has improved. Is it improving as fast as we need it? No. In the midst of this decline, we'll have challenges.
Okay. Same with FAI, or other comments you want to make?
So no, I couldn't agree more with Ms. McFarland's statements. And I think the challenges in the civilian agencies is that we don't have a baseline process like the DoD 5000 that as a civilian federal government we all follow. So FAI is working very hard to establish some baseline processes that are just good business decisions that then, regardless of what agency you're at or you're buying, we can drive those kind of same milestone decision type choices.
Okay. Mr. Jordan, looks like you want to be able to say something as well.
Chairman, I think the real threat to best value is coming. As budgets get tighter, there is a downward pressure on cost, and there's a tendency to focus on short-term savings in terms of those long-term life cycle costs. And so I think everybody needs to be cognizant of, okay, let's not focus on the short term. Let's keep our focus on long-term savings.
Right. Part of that is how that contracting officer is affirmed, how they're encouraged. If they're encouraged based on speed and number that they got done, if they're encouraged based on the final price, obviously that makes a huge difference. Or if there's some way to be able to affirm them, and you made a good judgment here, this was a tough one to be able to get it done. I hear lots of stories on that person is risk averse. They're going to do whatever's safest. They're going to work with a contractor they know. It's very difficult to be able to break in as a new person or as a new company getting in the mix. People that are not the prime, they're trying to work to get to the prime. They have a sub out there at some point and have had it for 5, 6 years. Everyone knows they're doing a good job but can't ever break in to being the prime. These same stories seem to be replicated, one person after another, that I talk with in the process. And so some of that is, again, I can't imagine the first person to bring this up, but it's how do we get down into that level to train them to help new companies jump into the process and move into that, because it obviously saves us money to not have the middleman just in the transition, but it adds more work to that contracting officer, because now he's not grouping a whole bunch of things together and getting that off his desk. Now he has to deal with multiple smaller, but it also is cheaper for us. So, yes, sir, Ms. Hutton.
Mr. Chairman, A lot rides on the requirement and how well you define that requirement up front. And we issued a report a couple months ago that just looked at the acquisition planning process. And I think you're kind of talking about some of the things that we observed is that the planning doesn't start soon enough. Because when you start sooner, you can be more thoughtful about the process. What is it we're going to buy? Right. What is the best approach to buy it? You also allow more time for competition. You also allow more time if you have someone with a critical eye, taking a look at that statement of work that you think you're going to have and looking at it and seeing, is this going to open it up for us for competition? We've done work looking at competition at DOD. You have competition advocates that are starting to get more involved in trying to promote more in competition. Right. And I think, just as an example, doing it early, better understand your requirements up front will hopefully give an increased likelihood that you're going to have better outcomes. Right.
I would agree on that, and it depends on whether you're close to the end of the fiscal year or not on that decision as far as how much advanced planning goes into it as well. I'm going to defer an additional 2 minutes real quick on it as well. It's the Chairman's privilege on this one. I need to ask about where we are on trafficking in persons. We had a hearing that was extensive talking about the issue, and especially dealing with State Department contracts in the Middle East and on our bases in Afghanistan and Iraq and third country nationals. No one disputed us on either panel that day to say this is not occurring. There was a common nodding of our heads as we're fighting through this. No one came back to us and said we need one more rule. The rules are in place. The processes seem to be in place. It's just not stopping. How do we stop indentured servitude on our bases and in our embassies?
Well, the Federal Acquisition Institute, in partnership, again, with the Department of Homeland Security, developed a course, an online module on human trafficking to make people aware of, in the acquisition workforce, of the signs of human trafficking, as well as the FAR clause, which is associated with that. We also worked with the Department of State in developing the requirements as a subject matter expertise. So that's available on the DAU learning management online system for the entire Federal workforce and everybody else.
Part of our frustration was we can't seem to find any contractor that's been suspended or debarred because of this.
So your real issue is follow-through. I mean, as you stated, all of this is in place. There's only a certain part that you can get to with the teaching and the training.
Right.
The second piece is follow-through.
Right. But if some contractor that's doing this feels no threat of being suspended and debarred, if the prime up the food chain from them feels no heat on it, they're not going to stop. They're making a ton of money and using people as slaves in the process, and they end up on our bases or in our embassies, and the people that are working around them, service members, don't know that. At some point, we've got to be able to put some heat down and say, this has got to stop. But that is the accountability on the other side. And what I'm asking is, how do we get that? How do we get that accountability that somebody's head starts rolling in this process to say, you're for the first time, we know this is happening. We know it's happening consistently. We have a low threshold of proof with the suspension and debarment on the facts that we're finding on the ground. You're suspended as we work through this process until we can get this resolved. And so suddenly the word begins to spread, cut it out. How do we get there?
Chairman, I think that at first identifying it is of critical importance, and it's really an oversight function, and obviously we would support greater oversight. Contracting in a contingency environment is a little bit more complicated. I think here within the U.S., obviously the threat of suspension and debarment is substantial. Right. Companies are very cognizant of it. I'm not sure that subcontractors, third country nationals, for example, fully understand the threat of suspension and debarment, or for that matter, care. But I certainly think that there needs to be a greater focus on it. Right. But I also think that in doing so, you need to understand the dynamics of a contingency contracting environment.
I understand that somewhat if we hadn't been there 10 years. So that's tougher to explain after 10 years. And it's even tougher to explain in our embassies on the ground. So I need to defer to Mr. Connolly as well.
I would just thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Chairman, because I think in our, just as a take back, but I mean in our hearing, not a single prosecution has occurred, not one. I mean, there have been tens of thousands of contracts in Afghanistan and Iraq, tens of thousands. Thousands of contractors, and the practice is widespread. We had testimony, tens of thousands, maybe many more. of human beings who are being trafficked as sort of payoff for contracts or just necessary costs of doing business, irrespective of the terrible harm to these human beings. Not one that I know of debarment or suspension. Three referred for sort of a warning, and that was it. And in a practice that the undisputed testimony widespread. And from our point of view, absolutely on a bipartisan basis, not acceptable, not acceptable. And it has to be stopped, and we have to go beyond training, as you said. I mean, it's about enforcement. How serious are we about this? And we ain't serious enough. But at any rate, I certainly echo the Chairman's sentiments on that, and we're going to stay on top of that. But coming back to the topic at hand, the Chairman earlier asked some questions about, well, sort of, we saw the acquisition and procurement and contracting personnel sort of shrink in ratio to the growth in contracting in the previous decade. We've done some catch-up, especially made some progress in the Pentagon, but now we're seeing contracts sort of stagnant, and maybe they will fall given the budgetary pressures we're all under, and we don't want to sort of be in this kind of cycle. I guess I want to focus less on the numerical balance and more on the qualitative aspects of why this makes sense as an investment, because when we have smart contracting officers, acquisition officers in the Federal Government, we can save money, we can make sure things are being run efficiently, we can avoid cost overruns and the kind of tragic problem the Chairman talked about in terms of human trafficking. Mr. Hutton, I want to give you an opportunity to comment on that.
Well, in terms of the quality and the expertise and versus the numbers, you're absolutely right. And when you're playing catch-up, which is I think is what we're doing, you're going to get a large influx of newer people. And they can get that initial training and they can get the certification. But just like in GAO, we're building our workforce. We have a lot of junior people. And we are spending a lot of time on the day-to-day, on-the-job training, trying to bring them and their expertise up to the level where we want them to be actually journeymen and go out on their own. It's certainly a big challenge. I think you have to have the mentors. If you're losing too many of your senior people, then who is going to train those folks? Plus the fact that you have a workforce, and it might depend on each agency, they got a lot to do. And when you have a lot to do, you wonder sometimes, are we just being too quick and not doing the job as thoroughly as we should? And so I think it's a trade-off of like the workload. It's a trade-off of the demographics of the people we have. Do we have the senior people to mentor? And just the overall number of people. When you're bringing in a lot of new people, I think this is a little bit of a transition for everyone right now.
Presumably, it's also about technical knowledge. I mean, we're now getting, it's one thing to say, I need you to manage a contract whereby we produce and we order 300,000 pencils every year. That's one kind of contract. But we're moving out of that kind of contract. We're now talking about sort of broad systems integration contracts that required fairly intimate knowledge of how technology works, so that when somebody in the department says, here's what I need, I have the skill set to translate that into the technical language in the RFP and then manage that once the contract's awarded to make sure that those specs are being met. And sometimes what the layperson who's deeply into the mission says has, they may not have an understanding of the boundaries of technology or what that really means in terms of cost, linking up the field offices and data, big databases and data entry and the coordination and being able to recognize this. I mean, those are all different kinds of capabilities we wouldn't have even talked about 30 years ago, but they're commonplace today. So I assume it's also about technical expertise, and that's got to be, that is the concern of mine, Mr. Chairman, because the higher level of technical expertise, now you're competing with the private sector, trying to get those people. And the private sector generally pays a lot more than we do in the public sector, and that is of concern to me moving forward. Will we be able to have that skill base, not just how you manage a contract, but do you have the technical knowledge to make sure that contract is being, fulfilled and the taxpayer interest? And I know I talk too much, but Mr.
No, that's fine, Mr. Connolly. And I would agree with you, and that's why, it's important to really have a good understanding of what you're buying and what your current capacity is. Things change all the time. Like you said, 10 years ago, we weren't buying half the things we are now, but we're buying very technically complex things. So you have to constantly be revisiting your acquisition workforce plan, and have a good understanding of who we have again and what the current capacity are. We've done some work looking at acquisition planning I mentioned earlier. Just some anecdotes. People were starting the process. They had the requirements. Yes, it was very technical. They started bringing in anybody within the organization that had insights on some of this technical issues. Some of the agencies are bringing in like business specialists or industrial type people to help support the front end of the process. Those are certain ways you can do it. But of course, for certain types of things, you might have to get the expertise outside. But the important thing is you do that up front, you do it early enough, so you really nail down what the heck it is we're buying.
Can I just ask one more question, Mr. Chairman? And I think it's fairly brief. We got 24 agencies figuring out how to do smart contracting. And some of them avail themselves of FAI, some might avail themselves of DAU, some may avail themselves of both, but they also do their own training. Your point of view about how well we're looking at best practices, we're creating some base uniform standard for all contracting officers, and how this coordination works or doesn't.
Well, I'll have to say, sir, we've gotten a request recently by the full committee about a month ago, and it's asked us to look at the role OFPP plays as well as FAI in the training civilian acquisition professionals. We've talked this afternoon that there's several agencies that have their own institutes and academies. I can't tell you today how many there are out there and who they're serving and what type of training. Now, maybe the folks on the panel can, but we haven't done work in that area. But we have been asked to look at that particular issue, as well as the physical location of the training facilities and the cost to develop and deliver that training. I think that review is going to be touching on some issues we haven't looked at more recently, and I think that's going to help inform a lot of the discussion here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me ask a quick follow-up on that as well. You mentioned all the different academies. Do we know how many training academies are out there?
Sir, I don't know of the exact number, but I can let you know that it's part of the legislation that requires each senior procurement exec to establish a line item in their budget to train their acquisition workforce.
Sure.
So my guess is that every agency is complying with the regulation and therefore is providing some form of training, whether it's sending them to individual vendor locations or they're establishing central locations like the VA, DHS.
Right. Is there some collaboration that could occur that could be coordinated to be able to combine some of these or suggest accommodation for smaller agencies and to say 3 or 4 of you, let's come together and let's find a way to do this more efficiently? Obviously, we'll talk about all day and we'll talk about for a long time about budget issues. So are there some of those things being explored?
So absolutely, and I'm actually glad you answered that or asked that question in that way, because we have at FAI developed the Federal Acquisition Institute Training Application System. I mentioned it before, and it's a robust workforce management tool, but what it actually also allows is every agency to load its course offerings into the system, and that any other agency can see when that agency doesn't fill a seat that there's open seats, so that then no seat would go left unfilled at the expense of the taxpayers' resources. And additionally, as we move towards the Training Consortium Board, we'll move into trying to collaborate on the development of new courseware.
Okay. So you're targeting to have your training areas as full as the airplanes coming in and out of Reagan Airport?
More so.
Okay. That would be terrific on that. Any other collaboration that is currently occurring between the two major groups here? Obviously, there's a lot of resources between the two of you. I'm hearing the website development and there's certification issues and trying to share some of that. Other projects that are ongoing that we need to be made aware of as far as sharing resources?
One of the main efforts that we're trying to do together is have the same learning management system. If we keep our systems close together, as we upgrade our courses and our curriculum, they can take advantage of it, and the same thing the other way around. So really, the central IT, as I emphasized during my testimony, is very important.
Okay. Yeah, rebuilding the wheel is not important. If we can take websites, we can take certifications and adapt them, that's much preferred. Mr. Conley, you have a final.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to thank you. This is a very important hearing. This topic, while maybe not universally sexy, the taxpayer's interest is lost or won, frankly, at this level of management. And it is so critical, and it may seem arcane, but it's very important. And I just thank you and congratulate you for having this hearing, because this is one area I'm confident we can proceed in a very bipartisan basis. Thank you.
No, thank you, and thank you for your time as well, getting into this and going through all the research and information and the work that you're doing on it. And look forward to continuing to hear the progress as we'll meet again in the days to come to be able to get an update of where we are. With that, we are adjourned.